people have been using this landscape for thousands of years. In 1079, it was secured by William I as his own hunting forest. Over a century later, local people were granted rights to gather firewood, cut turf, and graze their free-roaming animals. And for the last few centuries, the forest has also been home to free-roaming people. But this community began to be forcibly settled in the early 20th century. This is a really unusual archaeological site. Most of the digs that I've looked at over this series are from hundreds, thousands of years ago. This one is much, much more recent. The earliest record of Romany people in Britain goes back to the 1500s. They brought with them a nomadic lifestyle that centred around itinerant work and living off the land. Many families drifted in and out of the New Forest, its landscape perfectly suited to their way of life. But in 1926, the Forestry Commission introduced compounds, designated campsites that aimed to contain Roma people and restrict their movement. Thorny Hill was the site of one of these compounds. Archaeologist John Henry Phillips, of Romany descent himself, is running the community excavation here. John Henry.
Hello, Alice.
Hello.
Welcome to the New Forest.
Thank you. He wants to recover the lost story of his ancestors through this difficult transition. You're digging in this idyllic place, hoping to uncover actually a fairly recent story.
Yeah, very recent. I mean, the last people who lived in this compound left in about 1974, so it's really recent archaeology.
Yeah. Tell me about the compound. When did it start?
So, Romany people lived in the New Forest for hundreds of years, and then with more sort of nouveau rich people moving into the area, building big houses, they didn't want to see the Romany people in the New Forest anymore.
Okay.
So, local authorities came up with this idea of these gypsy compounds, essentially. And this is one of them, and at its peak there was about 400 people living here.
Really? Right, just around where we are?
Just in this opening here, yeah.
I mean, there really is nothing to see here, so how did you know where to look?
Well, handily, there's an OS map that has the camp marked on it. And you can see it says clearly Gypsy Rehabilitation Centre, and then the layout of a compound right where we're stood.
Yeah, I mean, even that, Rehabilitation Centre.
Yeah.
Why did they decide to put this camp in this position?
Because originally, Thorny Hill was a traditional stopping place where Romany people would travel around and come back to yearly to find work.
So the idea in the 1920s then was to take a community who were quite nomadic in this landscape and encourage them to settle in one place?
Encourage them by force, absolutely, yeah. There was fines, they'd impound their animals and they'd let them get them back if they promised to move into the compound. It was all a very forced thing to end that sort of nomadic life in the New Forest.
And it's about acknowledging the history as well, rather than just tucking it away.
Yeah, there's no point running from it. Let's talk about it, let's come together, let's start that conversation.
The camp at Thorny Hill would eventually evolve into a more established settlement, with prefabricated houses replacing tents. And although the families here were free to come and go, the ultimate aim was to encourage them to abandon their nomadic way of life and settle in one place. Records from the time describe attempts to teach women to care for a house, while men were encouraged to seek permanent employment. The team are only allowed to dig a few targeted trenches, but they're already uncovering physical traces of the compound.
So this trench has changed quite a bit since we started excavating it. We put it here to try and find the remains of one of the huts.
Yeah.
And then when we got down, we started finding concrete foundations that had been destroyed. Then we kept digging down, and then we actually managed to find this massive sewage pipe.
So there was sewage put in, so presumably there's a cesspit or a septic tank or something
somewhere.
somewhere
Yeah, so we
here.
ended up moving one of the trenches because we were going to put it where all the brambles are.
Yeah.
And I think if you dug there, you'd find the cesspit. There's one particular thing we're really pleased with this trench. There was some stories and some rumours that there was a particular illness, a particular disease that spread through the compounds, perhaps due to the sort of poor sanitary conditions of putting all those people together with one tap.
Only one tap?
Yeah, one tap for 400 people.
Yeah.
So we're taking soil samples because it'd be nice to sort of confirm that, you know, put factual science to the anecdotal stories that you hear.
Did you expect to find more in the way of foundations then?
Yeah, well, this is a bit of the mystery. We didn't know what happened once they actually moved out, what they did with the prefabs. We've heard they've been destroyed or knocked down, but we wanted to see if we'd actually find them.
And it also looks like they've done a pretty comprehensive job of not just taking away the hut itself, but actually digging down and digging out the foundations. They haven't just covered them over. They could have just covered them over.
Yeah. I mean, who knows why they did it? Maybe they wanted to return it to the angelic New Forest landscape that it now is. But yeah, they certainly did a very thorough job of getting rid of those prefab houses.
Yeah. One by one, the prefab houses were demolished and the families here were moved on into council houses nearby. Now the excavation is drawing visitors who still live in the surrounding area, and it's giving them a place to share their memories. Bronk, you've got a personal connection here, haven't you?
Yes, my parents were born over there.
So they actually lived in this compound?
Yes, before they got moved into houses. And some of the people, when they moved into the houses, actually slept in the garden because they couldn't sleep inside.
How many houses were there here
There were 13.
OK.
And they probably have 3 or 4 kids each, some more.
Yeah, and you remember it? You remember being a child here?
Well, I remember being taken out through the forest and being taught how to find mushrooms and different things you can eat.
Yeah.
Go out ferreting and bring some rabbits home to eat.
Yeah.
Seriously, go and shoot a pheasant in a tree on a moonlit night. Things like that. Live off the land.
You sound nostalgic about
Well,
it.
yeah, I did enjoy it, though. You have all this forest as your playground and run wild and do what you want.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's not all bad, is it, being a gypsy? Is it?
Alongside the trenches, the team are field walking in the surrounding forest and are finding a large collection of objects that once belonged to the people here. The finds reveal that many were keeping their Romany traditions alive. Tell me about this basket.
Yeah, this is a beautiful, really traditional basket that came from the local heritage centre. It was made in Thorney Hill, it was made in the compound. It's made by a woman called Annie Doe. It's made out of grass from the local area, but they've bound it with bramble. It's a beautiful thing.
So we've got very much traditional crafts carrying on in the 20th century.
Yes, because traditionally Romany people move around mainly for the economy, for work. So once they put them into the compound, they then sort of have to resort to more craft making and selling it in the surrounding area of the compound. So then you start to see things like baskets and pegs being made.
Yeah. What about the objects that you've been finding?
Yeah, they're very varied, but they're all very sort of traditional Romany things. So Romany families to this day collect a certain pattern by Crown Derby called Amari pattern, for the most part targeted at Romany communities for them to buy, right? And this is a piece of Crown Derby Amari pattern.
Yeah, I recognise that.
Yeah, but that is a lot older. That's from around 1890 to 1910, and that was made in Japan, not in England. That's an original piece of Amari ware imported from Japan that Crown Derby sort of adopted the pattern of later and sold their own version of it.
We're often doing this when we're looking at much older sites and we're saying, oh, you know, the pottery is an expression of identity. And we're seeing that really visibly here in a way that actually we can still understand. Crown Derby is still making this pattern.
Of course, yeah, and it lends itself to the fact that the idea of these compounds was to try and make people lose that identity, and you can see clear as day that they weren't willing to give that up easily.
And then we've got a couple of rather interesting objects here.
Yes.
This has only just emerged, hasn't it?
Yeah, just very recently.
Yeah.
This is really special. This is the actual sharpening wheel from a knife sharpening cart.
Yeah.
Romany people would go out and they'd go village to village, town to town, sharpening people's knives with a little cart.
Yeah.
Very, very traditional, you know, a really sort of staple of gypsy culture.
And from one disc to another.
Yes, yes.
So that's come out of your dig.
Yeah, so this is very different.
I can readily identify this. It is a record.
Yeah, do you think so? Yeah, I think so. But not just any vinyl record, it's a 1968 cream record.
No, how can you tell that? Because the label's gone.
Yes, the label has gone from decades of being in the woods, but one of our volunteers is a very keen record collector and was able to follow the matrix number that, believe it or not, still survives on there, a tiny little...
Where's that?
It is it is here, on this side. Tiny little numbers.
Oh, just tucked in there.
Yep, which was Wheels of Fire by Cream. And not just any, it was a double album.
Yeah.
And this is side D.
That's wonderful.
So the sound of the Compounds by 1968, believe it or not, was Cream, it was Ginger Baker, it was Eric Clapton. So
yeah,
there you have it.
Pressed Rat and Warthog closed down their shop. They didn't want to. It was all they had got.
I think if I'd walked through this clearing in the New Forest earlier in the year, I would have passed straight through and I wouldn't have even realised there was archaeology here. The ground is slightly undulating, but essentially that history has disappeared. And what's really surprised me about this dig is that it's quite small and targeted, but it's already bringing people in, not just to dig, but to share their stories. It's already having an impact, and it's opening up conversation.